Welcome to the Natural Alternative Podcast. You're here today with Madonna Guy, and I'm delighted to welcome Dr. Rima Laibow. Good morning.
Morning. How are you, Madonna?
Very well. So we have nothing to chat about today, obviously, given our little preemptive chat. So let's start with a little bit of your history. You have such a breadth of experience in, well, whistleblowing amongst everything else. But tell us a little bit about your history. How did you
I
get here today as such a force?
Thank you. Thank you so much for saying I'm a force. Um, I have always been addicted to the truth as I see it, and I'm always willing to change what I understand the truth to be based on based on reality, based on data. I'm very fond of data. Some things like love don't require data. They are a truth unto themselves, but um, everything else that has anything to do with science or health or ill health or politics or finances, and they're all very much the same, aren't they?
They are.
Has an awful lot to do with data, which means the integrity of science and data collection is essential to understanding the world. Now, I come from a home, a family of origin with several blatantly, floridly psychotic people. So for me as a child, my mother and my brother were absolutely uh, clinically insane and violent, and my father wasn't wrapped too tight. So for me, survival meant developing a bullshit meter with a hair trigger that would peg zoom when I heard nonsense or irrationality or lies or distortions. And that was a very unpleasant but useful background for somebody who wants to know what's real and has a wish to speak openly about what's real, and that would be me. So I decided that I was going to go to medical school. And on my very, very first day, and by the way, it was very difficult for me to get into medical school because the interviews didn't go well. People would ask me what I thought, and I would tell them. And at that time, this was a long time ago. I entered medical school in 1966. At that time, women were not welcome, at least in the United States, and in medical schools. And so you had to be three times as well prepared as a man. And you also had to meet the stereotypical requirements: docile, eyes downcast, flirtatious. That didn't work. So eventually I did get into medical school. And on my very first day, my very first lecture, the most important course in the entire curriculum, which of course is written by the pharmaceutical industry and controlled by the pharmaceutical industry, which explains why physicians do not know anything about nutrition.
Or the
It makes
human body.
sense.
It's
Or the
amazing.
human body,
Yeah.
actually, or frequency, or a great many other things. But
Yes.
I didn't know that at the time. I was, bright-eyed and bushy-tailed, and I had my pencil. We had pencils and pens and this stuff called paper back then. It was amazing. Anyway, I'm sitting there, my first lecture, my first day of my first hour of medical school, ready to write. Maybe it was a pen, could have been a pen. Anyway, the professor of pharmacology, which is a great way to start off medical education, right? The professor of pharmacology says, "Men," and I immediately checked to make sure that I had not made a significant error, but he, in fact, was wrong. He said, "Men, I want you to remember this. There are only side effects to drugs. Only side effects." He said, "All drugs work by the same method. They all poison enzyme systems. And if you like the effect, you call it a therapeutic benefit. If you don't like the effect, you call it a side effect. But in fact, there are only side effects." So I stuck up my little hand and I said, As I understand it, enzymes are the very stuff of life. And there are about 35,000 enzymatic reactions in every one of the 10 trillion cells of the body at every moment. And therefore, if you're poisoning enzymes, how are you doing people any good? And he said, in a long paragraph with a lot of very multisyllabic words, basically, sit down and shut up. And two things happened at that point, Madonna. The first was that I said, I will never do that to a patient. I will never use a pharmaceutical compound to poison enzyme systems. I will find other, better, non toxic ways. So that was my first
Mm.
moment in medical school. And the second thing that happened is I realized, because I'm fairly analytic, I realized that this profession that I was now entering the conveyor belt of was very, very happy with how questions, but didn't like why questions at all, which alerted me, and my education confirmed completely, it alerted me to the fact that allopathic medicine has absolutely no interest in finding the root cause and curing the underlying reason that anything exists. What they do is suppress symptoms, and they do it badly. And that means they need more of what is the whole point of the deal, which is drugs, which
Yes.
is control, which is illness. So it's an illness management, manipulation, and manufacturing system, which I'm licensed in. Now, in almost 53 years of being a physician, I have never written, and a psychiatrist, I have never written a prescription for a pharmaceutical. Never. I have written for bioidentical hormones, but I have never written a prescription for a drug because, as I said on my very first day of medical school, I will never do that to a patient. By the way, I'm unemployable within the medical system. So, so I had a private practice in New York State, in and around Manhattan. And people would come to me for non-pharmaceutical treatment, for frequency, homeopathic, neurobiofeedback, um, nutrition detox, this and intravenous nutrition chelation, this and that and the other thing, really cool stuff with a lot of cool toys and a lot of interaction. Um, and they would get well, and they would tell their friends about what had happened to them, and people would come from further and further away, until eventually I was seeing people from all over the world without doing any advertising, but they would get well, and I was seeing, the plumber's wife and the super elites of the world. And the super elites, by the way, never paid their bills. So I developed a separate policy for them. The plumber's wife, even if she owed me money, would always pay. But the super elites, the kings, the queens, the musicians, the athletes, they would never pay. And so for them, I had a special policy, which was they had to pay me in advance for that day's treatment. Wonderful moment where the wife of uh, a very, very, very famous and powerful sheikh was standing in front of my receptionist desk, and the receptionist asked her for the money, the in cash, no checks or credit cards for these people because they simply would stop them. Um, and so she asked for the amount of money that was anticipated for that day's treatment. And the woman with her two bodyguards behind her in her abaya, her robes, said, "Do you know who I am?" And I came out from behind the reception, from the partition, and said, "Yes, madam. And that's why you're paying in cash and these people aren't." So that was fun. Anyway, I was doing that for a time. And then one of these poobah people was a queen. I can't tell you who she was because she deserves medical privacy even though she's an entirely reprehensible specimen of a human being. Um, and she said to me one day, it's almost time for the great culling to begin. And I said, the what? And she said, culling, C-U-L. I said, I know the word. What are you talking about? What's the great culling? And she said, the culling of the useless eaters. Now, this was back in 2002, 2003, and I had never heard the term useless eater. I have a great deal of understanding of it now, but I had not at that time. And I said, what's a useless eater? She said, not what, my dear. Oh, do I hate it, Madonna, when people I don't have a relationship with call me my dear, or honey, or sweetie, or I hate that. Anyway, I said, what's a useless eater? She said, not what, my dear. Who? And I said, okay, who's a useless eater? She said, those people who are consuming our non-renewable resources. And I said, did it ever occur to you that you're consuming their non-renewable resources? And she said, oh, that's an interesting point. Well, anyway, and she dismissed that. And I
As
said, so
they
how,
do.
as they do. Uh, yes, they don't have to think about these things. And so I said, well, how many of these useless eaters are you planning on culling? And she said, 90%. And I said, 90% of what? And she said, 90% of the current world's population. And I said, whoa, 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 wait, 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 wait. Your enormous fortune is based on selling massive amounts of shit to huge numbers of people. So
Yeah.
if you don't have huge numbers of people to sell your massive amounts of shit to, how are you going to maintain your enormous wealth? And she said, no, no, you really don't understand, my dear. I said, obviously I don't. She said, the mercantile era, which began in the 14th century with the Hanseatic League in Germany, is coming to an end. We are moving to the neo-feudal era. There will be us, the neo-aristocrats. She was already an aristocrat. There will be us, the neo-aristocrats at the top, surrounded by our servants and servitors. Madonna, that was the first time I ever heard anybody use the
Oh.
word servitor in a sentence. Surrounded by our servants and servitors, and around them our technicians. And that requires only 10% of the current population. Everyone else is superfluous. And she left. By the way, I cured her. She left, and I thought either this woman is completely insane, and because I was focused on a physical uh, issue, I didn't think about it and I completely missed it, or she has just given me an enormously important clue. Well, of course, the reality is both. She gave me an enormously important clue, and she was crazy as a bedbug because she's a psychopath. She was raised to be a
And she
psychopath.
was talking about it. She
No,
wasn't
she was
hiding
perfect.
it.
Well, I was, not someone that she could expect any harm from. I was, a servitor. So
Yes.
why not? She could speak. When you go to the hairdresser and the hairdresser's combing your hair and you say, oh God, I can't believe he left me. It's kind of that. You're
Yeah.
speaking to someone who's irrelevant to you, but you're speaking for your own purposes, as she was. So anyway, I thought I got to know more about this useless eater stuff. And this was back in 2002 when we didn't have the kind of resources that we have on the internet. So research was considerably harder. And I started learning about useless eaters. And I discovered that useless eater was a term of art uh, as Hitler was coming to power, and that it has a old and disreputable history among murderous, psychopathic monsters known as politicians, kings, queens, etc. Um, and by the way, there is an article that's still available on the internet called The Killing Fields of Codex, Codex. And in the Killing Fields of Codex, I bring together the information about the weaponization of food, which is what Codex Alimentarius is, and the elimination of useless eaters. And of course, now we see the World Health Organization, which really should be called the World Holocaust Organization, in my opinion. We see, similar to the United States FDA, not the Food and Drug Administration, the Fraud and Death Administration.
And the
Um,
CDC.
and the CDC Center for the Creation of Diseases. Um, so we we see that every aspect of life is being weaponized to bring into place the very, very well thought out, brilliantly financed, completely inhuman and psychopathic um, thing that we call globalization or the Great Reset.
Yes.
Uh, the the plans have been laid for well over 100 years. People don't realize that Brave New World was an exact blueprint. It was published in 1922, written in 1921, and published in 1922 by Aldous Huxley. He was part of a group of people known as the Fabian Socialists. Margaret Mead was a Fabian Socialist. George Bernard Shaw, George Orwell, who wrote what he believed was a description of what was coming, not a cautionary tale in 1984 and Animal Farm and so on. His last words when he was asked how he saw the future of humanity as he was dying, he said, "A boot on the face of humanity forever." Well, that's what globalization is. And they were waiting for their technology, but they laid out their intent. And now, with the artificial wombs,
Oh,
the
that's awful, isn't it?
yes, well, now we have the ability to create chemically altered, transhumanized non-humans.
Yes.
And of course, the quote
Germ free.
vaccine.
Oh,
Yes, yes, yes. And so and owned, patented and owned. Um, so this is neo-slavery.
yeah.
This is incredible evil. And it comes in one shiny package after another shiny package. One of the things, oh, so back to how this pertains to me. So I learned and I studied and I read and I realized that our side, the health freedom side, has a problem. We're right, we understand the situation, and this goes back a long way. We understand the situation. We know what's wrong. We know what's coming. We know what's happening. But we, in general, do not have much of a capacity to act, to think strategically, and choose our actions tactically. What we do is we wait until something bad is just about to happen or already has happened. We've lost another skirmish or a battle, and then we run around with our hands in the air and we say, oh, 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 it's
Yeah.
terrible. And we've lost that one. And then we repeat, we rinse and repeat. Well, I was married to an astounding human being. Much to my surprise, I was an old anti-war activist, and I wound up literally leaping into the arms of a total stranger who turned out to be Major General Albert N. Stubblebine III, an astonishingly brilliant strategic analyst who did that for the Army as part of their intelligence um, world and had a huge impact on what happened with Russia during the Cold War. Anyway, uh, I he and I were running my medical practice. He was an amazing healer and teacher, hands-on healer, extraordinary man. Um, and I walked into his office one day and I said, "Darling, we have to close the practice." And he, being in addition to brilliant and strategic and so on, was practical. He's because we earned our living through the practice. And he said, "Why?"
Oh no,
Not a
not that
bad
question.
question. Not a bad question. Thank you. That was a good point. Why? And I said, because we're losing every battle, because our side does not think strategically, they act tactically. And if we do not enter this fray to derail the globalists, we will lose everything globally. And I explained what I was hearing. And of course, I had been talking to him about it all along as I was becoming educated in this area. And he said, yes, I agree. And so we closed our practice of medicine, drug-free medicine, and we sold our house so we'd have some walking around money. And we created the Natural Solutions Foundation. You have sympathy with some of those words.
I sure
Um,
do.
we created the Natural Solutions Foundation, a completely independent NGO with no ties to any government or any industry or anything except the truth. And we decided of all of the issues that lay before us, vaccination, chemtrails, the weaponization of food, the complete disaster that is the allopathic medical system, et cetera, et cetera. We said that there were multiple doors that we could enter this world of impending destruction through, but the one that we chose to start with was food. Everybody eats. Mothers, every mother on the planet, whether she's white or black or green, no matter where she lives, every mother on the planet wants to supply her children, her family, her community, herself with good food.